Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Dr. Jim Wilson. As Stan already alluded to, Jim is the second cancer center director after Nate, and under Jim's leadership, the cancer center became the comprehensive cancer status that it was one of few in the country at that time. And Jim left here about 20 years ago, became the cancer center director at the UT Southwestern, and recently he's the chief scientific officer of the CIPRIT in Texas. So let's welcome Jim to share his personal story, interactions with Nate.
Great to be here. And Stan and Gary, thank you so much for the invite to celebrate Nate's Achievement Award, Lifetime Achievement Award. And it's expressed so really nicely by Stan. Having Nate as a mentor, colleague, and friend has meant a great deal to my career and to me personally. And Linda and I are just delighted to be here today to share with you, friends and colleagues, this occasion. So in thinking about what I wanted to say today, this figure came to my mind. A few of you here may remember this. It is, in fact, my recreation of a slide that Nate showed as the summation argument to the National Cancer Institute site visit reviewers evaluating a new colon cancer program that he was leading in the early 1990s. Now, you may recognize a few of these folks. This is Thor, Archer, Black Widow, the Hulk, Captain America, and of course, Iron Man. Nate had invited a group of us to join a new cancer center that had the purpose of bridging the scientific prowess at Case with the clinical expertise at University Hospitals of Cleveland. And the colon cancer program was one such example. His argument to the National Cancer Institute, as I recall it, was that the group of us participating in the colon cancer program project brought individual talents like the superheroes, but that working together as a team, we would be invincible in taking on the challenge of colon cancer. At the time, we all thought that the superhero reference was a bit over the top, but that was Nate. His superpower was the generous ability to help develop individual talent, but also to inspire the participation in teams where that participation produced much more than what could be achieved individually. And of course, Stan, and I think you'll hear later, just some wonderful examples of just that impact. The colon cancer program was funded and went on to have a legacy of seminal contributions to understanding the prevention and treatment of colon cancer and other cancers. And as I thought about this superhero illusion, I realized that in reflecting on Nate Berger's lifetime achievements, what he's achieved and what he's continuing to do, it's an important link with the superheroes because, like them, Nate has an empathy that calls him to action to use his talents for good purpose. And indeed, when we reflect on his accomplishments and what he's continuing to do, it's an inspiration to all of us to use our talents and to apply these for good purpose. With that in mind, what I would like to do now is to talk about a program that I'd had the privilege of having association with as a chief scientific advisor for much of the past decade in Texas, the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute. This program was created in 2007 by the people of Texas and appropriated $300 million a year towards cancer research. It was renewed 10 years later in 2019, and it's now a $6 billion program for investing in the cancer research prowess in the state of Texas. It was constituted by the state legislature to do three things: to invest in the research prowess of Texas research institutions, and to use that investment to create and expand the life science infrastructure in the state, hoping then that that would accelerate innovations in treatment and prevention of cancer. And to put this commitment into some perspective, the NCI contributions to Texas at the time were about $200 million a year. So the CPRIT investment meant about 1.5 times more each year in addition, hopefully to accelerate what was going on. Now, with that amount of money, there was some skepticism of whether this was actually going to be used appropriately, and led to a number of comments. This is an Associated Press article excerpt that was widely publicized that talks about Texas giving birth to the modern oil industry, inventing the handheld calculator, and sending man to the moon. Very Texan-oriented, but wondered if this Lone Star State can cure cancer. And fortunately, at the time, Al Gilman, a proud CWRU MD PhD graduate, and then the dean at the School of Medicine at UT Southwestern, agreed to take on the inaugural Chief Scientific Officer role. Al's vision for how to use the funds that were appropriated by the state was actually pretty simple. His idea was that there would be grants awarded for research projects, for investment in new company development, hopefully to move those discoveries forward into commercialization, and also to address a legislative requirement that 10% of these funds be used for cancer prevention purposes. But the real contribution was the insistence that these funds would be allocated based on a peer review by non-Texans and adjudicated by a scientific council of very established scientists that are non-Texans that would dictate where the funds would be used. Those of you who may follow the cancer letter will know that about 2 years into this system, which had been functioning pretty well, things began to unravel because the governing board, which was politically appointed, began to try to go around the recommendations of the scientific review councils, and based on disgruntled applicants, et cetera. And a big kerfuffle really ensued. Al resisted, actually then was dismissed by the governing board, and then the whole thing unraveled with the scientific council peer reviewers all resigning. Fortunately, a few inspired leaders in the state got together and decided that they would dismiss the existing governing board, reconstituted the councils and peer review system that Al had set up, and go forward with a compliance program that assured that the peer review would be honored. And in fact, that system had maintained in place for the next 12 years in a very important way, and responsible for, I think, the contributions that this program has been able to make, that I want to just go over briefly. With the idea that, that these would be ideas that perhaps states like Ohio and others that do have interest in state-funded research may consider some of the Texas experience. About 70% of the funds to date, which have totaled now $3.2 billion, have gone to the research institutions in the state. A little under 20% to new company formations, and 10%, as I mentioned, for the prevention services. The impact of the research program has been enormous, and is shown here by the pie graph. approximately a third of all of those funds have gone to recruitment awards. And I'll talk about these in a little more detail in a moment. An additional component of what we'll call the infrastructure investment have gone for core facilities to the institutions, for training awards, and then another third or so for investigator-initiated research. The highlight of this whole program, I think, is arguably the recruitment program, which in the States known as the Seaport Scholars Program. And it was established to attract, with very competitive award packages, investigators at every level of academic research, established investigators with awards up to $10 million, rising stars, which basically were established but young investigators, and first-time tenure-track faculty. As you can see, about 288, now almost 60 of these individuals have come from the established investigator group, and the impact, I think, is really hard to overstate. The initial cohort involved Jim Allison, who was recruited to MD Anderson, and Sean Morrison to UT Southwestern, both renowned, internationally renowned investigators who not only brought their programs, but then subsequently have developed very large programs with their respective interests. And then the most recent Seaport established investigators, Pavan Reddy, who was a physician scientist of great interest in stem cell transplantation medicine, has been recruited to Baylor College of Medicine as their new cancer center director, and Hughes investigator Ruben Harris for the Department of Biochemistry leadership at UT San Antonio. While the established cancer centers in Texas have benefited greatly in proportion to the number of individuals recruited by these methods, it's not exclusively to the cancer centers that the impact's been noted. In fact, what's happened is that about half of these established investigators have been to leadership positions, which have established in programs like UT Austin, Rice, and Texas A&M, all three top-tier universities with chemistry, computer sciences, et cetera, programs that they then have now moved to cancer research from those important disciplines. To think about ways of actually capturing some of the impact of these research investments, I've mentioned the number of researchers in their labs recruited to Texas. This is a legacy that will continue and be compounded annually. The retention, about 95% of these researchers that have been recruited I think, speaks to the impact that they're making. The core facilities have measured have made an impact that is in many ways beyond just basic science research or clinical infrastructure research. It's in areas of novel ways of introducing drug development and the like into the state with really major instrumentation and other types of facilities. About 11,000 patients have been enrolled in the Seaport sponsored therapeutic trials, 3 comprehensive cancer centers in the state, whereas earlier just MD Anderson was the only comprehensive center. Programs, as I've mentioned, at top-tier universities in the state that are now cancer-focused at Austin, Rice, and Texas A&M. 13 SPORE programs in the state, and a direct follow-on funding from these investments of over $3.25 billion. One of the challenges that that the Seaport program has grappled with, and I think all of us think hard about, is how to move the discoveries from the university research into a developmental process that would actually, at the end point, lead to an FDA-approved drug that's having, or a device that's having an impact on cancer. These steps are complicated, and the duration, particularly in the oncology field, is long. And so the approach has been, I think, quite interesting, and the actual conclusion is yet to be determined. But the approach was to make non-dilutive awards early on, about $3 million for the proof of concept awards, and then as the arguments for development became more solid and the future looked promising, awards of up to $20 million. The idea was to actually bring companies into the state, but as it turned out, most of the interesting activities have come from Texas-based researchers, and 36 of these 52 are actually linked to Texas research, one of which is belzutifan, which is a unique HIF-2 alpha inhibitor, a target that was thought to be undruggable, but the UT Southwestern chemistry program under Steve McKnight identified a strategy that then was led to a Peloton Therapeutics formation, an initial CPRIT award, a development of a drug that showed promise, interacting with the UT Southwestern Kidneys Board, demonstrating some clinical activity early on in a genetically high-risk kidney cancer disease, leading to actually Merck taking on Peloton Therapeutics and an FDA approval. I mean, this is the ultimate one example so far of the 52, but as I think you appreciate, this is a long process and one that's continuing. The other aspect of this program was 10% of the funds were directed to prevention services. This happened to actually be an important contribution because we were able to demonstrate early on some tangible benefits from the program. Regrettably, this program has special impact in Texas because we're one of the few states that remain to have not instituted the Medicare provisions under the Affordable Care Act, and so we have the largest number of uninsured individuals in the country. And this program was targeting those individuals with screening programs for breast, cervical, colon, and lung cancer. Significant number of precursors identified, as well as early stage cancers. The map shows you the heat map of the number of projects going on across the state, covered the entire state with not only screenings, but also important preventive clinical services. But the other impact of this program is that it showed us how to connect with the communities in Texas. And as a consequence, we developed a program targeting one of the biggest problems in the state, and that was the hepatocellular cancer epidemic that was arising from multiple factors: hepatitis, fatty liver involvement, genetic risk of the Hispanic population that's in the state, and connected the 4 comprehensive and other NCI Cancer Center in the state to community sites across to recruit a cohort of individuals with cirrhosis that are now being followed prospectively under the direction of Hassim El-Sarak at Baylor. Major amount of funding to be able to pull this off, to do routine screenings at intervals that are now being tracked with biomarkers and other factors to actually try to sort out if there are some additional early clues to identifying those individuals that are progressing from cirrhosis to hepatocellular cancers. There's also a statewide advocacy program to try to engage primary care physicians as well as the health systems in doing a better job of identifying at-risk individuals as well as preventive services. Notably, that this initial investment's already led to follow-on funding from the National Institutes of Health for the program that exceeds the CPRIT investment to date. It's now at $27 million. And The overall goal is by the end of the decade to have reduced the hepatocellular cancer mortality in the state by 50%. So these are a few examples of the progress that the CPRIT program has made. I think that you'll all appreciate the impact on the research programs within the state. In addition to the CPRIT specific awards, there's been over $8 billion of direct follow-on funding that's contributed to this. Now, importantly, when you begin to think about how to convince your legislative leadership and others why this funding is good, it's not just for the altruism or the investment in research, but it also can have a really dramatic impact on our economy. And in the state of Texas, for example, just last year, the CPRIT program directly impacted about $630 million in gross product. This translated to $50 million in tax revenue directly back to the state. And when you think about how the direct investments of CPRIT actually get compounded through the system, the actual state tax estimated collections rise to a sort of eye-popping $1.2 billion. So an investment in research that actually pays tangibly on an annual basis and is actually continuing to compound in that impact. Permanent job creation as well as a significant growth in the bioscience manufacturing. So hopefully this review gives you some sense of the CPRIT program. It's now scheduled for another 8 years of going forward. I was very pleased that last year I was able to recruit Michelle LeBeau after she completed her multi-decade leadership of the Chicago Cancer Center to succeed me as the Chief Scientific Officer, and she's already on board making some very important new contributions to the program. And for me, thank you for the opportunity to share this story, but also very much the opportunity to come back and congratulate Nate on his lifetime of achievement and actually what Nate's continuing to do. Thank you.